Hello there. I want to make a video about unschooling. It's interesting because I had an interaction recently with somebody who, um, I guess they run an unschooling forum, and they have all the facts and the data and all the opinions and everything. And it was a really interesting point because I got to see really into the mind of someone who's really taken on the unschooling point and all of the philosophy and the beliefs and all of the full thing. And it's fascinating because there are a lot of really cool points within the whole unschooling theory and the authors and just that whole thing. But there are some dangerous pitfalls, and I've seen people fall into these, and especially people who, um, you know, they are looking for something for their children that's not school because they see the problems, they see some of the issues, they see, the fact that, you don't really, most people enjoy school. And even those who do, the results are not really what you want ultimately for your children. There's like these limitations. And, as parents, we want our children to have fun. We also want them, though, to be prepared for the world that's around them. And I think I'll just start with the number one pitfall, I think. And if you can avoid these points within unschooling, then I think you can do it successfully, whether you want to call it unschooling or not. And I think that the unschooling experts will watch this video and they'll say, that's not unschooling. So if you just want to be the hardcore, sticking to all the rules of unschooling and, do all of that, I mean, you can do that. But I don't see that you can actually do it successfully and prepare your child effectively to be in this current world and in the system that we live in. So pitfall number one would be believing that your child can be totally outside of the system that we live in. And this is one that I see with people who are big proponents of unschooling. Not all do this, but many do. That they believe that they're somehow totally outside of that system that affects all of us. And it's interesting having a conversation with somebody about this on YouTube comments. Because if you're using YouTube, that means you have internet, and that means you have electricity, which means you must have money of some form to pay for those things. And you're in some way interacting with the larger system that touches everybody, which is the financial system. You can't be outside of that. You can delude yourself into believing that you're outside of it, but you can't really be outside of it. And it's really dangerous because if you don't prepare your child effectively to be in that system, obviously we'd like to avoid, a lot of the negative things that we see being totally consumed by the system. And maybe I'll get into some of that. But if we don't prepare them to be equal to that system and work within it, then we're really doing them a disservice. And I think that's what parents who put their kids in school ultimately are looking for is, how do I prepare my child to live in this world and survive and make a living and have a life and so forth without just being in a constant struggle. Of course, if we look honestly at the school system, by and large, it doesn't produce a child or an adult who can really effectively deal with the world around them. In 2019, right before the end of the year, around November, the nation's report card was released, and it was talked about in some of the mainstream media. And they showed that the reading levels have either stagnated or gone down, or math and reading have either stagnated or gone down since the early 90s. And IQ is going down. I mean, there's a whole plethora of research out there to support that. You just have to look for it. Of course, it's not heavily promoted. And then we had this big pandemic thing that happened, which kind of distracted people from that. Not that they would have been focused on it anyways. But the changes that were brought into the school system and so forth during the whole COVID pandemic, they haven't done any favors for the children who are in schools. In fact, they're showing things are declining even more. So school is not really preparing people. And then obviously you have the whole problem with college debt, and then you're in a debt trap and all that cycle and everything. And so another issue is you get out of school and you don't really know what you're really wanting to do because you spent most of your time not discovering what you could do that you could be passionate about, that could add value to this world. It's more just like, how can I make money and what can I do to survive? And so it plays very heavily into that attitude. And so I understand with unschooling, if I were to place myself in the shoes of a parent who's considering unschooling or studying that or looking at that, and again, I'm not talking about the diehard, hardcore fanatics who are like, I'm unschooling till I die, all the way, every single point. For those people, maybe they're not going to hear me. I understand that. So this is again more for the people who are like, I'm kind of dabbling in it. I'm kind of dipping my toes in it, or maybe I've been doing it for a while and I'm seeing that there's problems, or I'm not really handling it very well. How do I make this work, right? So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. What is the baby? The baby, well, actually, before I get to that, let's look at what's the bathwater some more, okay? Because that's the part that attracts people to unschooling is I don't like school. I don't like the force, the sort of one size fits all approach that doesn't work for my child. I don't like the environment. I don't like the bullying that goes on. I don't like the point of, the teacher is the authority and you have to just do what they say even if they're wrong, and you have to sit down and be quiet and do what you're told even though you want to run around and play. And then there's all of the oh, your child isn't focused, maybe they have ADHD, or they can't read, maybe they have dyslexia, they have all these things, but they don't really give you solutions, they just give you band-aids. There's all these different things that go on, and I can understand that you don't like that. I mean, I didn't like school, and I did fairly well in school. I was top quarter of my class at a very prestigious private school for high school, college prep. I went on to an extremely competitive, exclusive engineering school that's highly selective. I mean, you have to get a personal recommendation from either a sitting U.S. congressman or senator to even apply to the school. And I went to that school. I did fairly well. I was a National Merit finalist for the National Merit Scholar Program. I did well with the standardized testing. I did well with the school, generally speaking. I think I only failed one class when I was in high school, and it was just one semester of it, and it was like art history because I just didn't care and I just goofed off. And later, when I was in university, I actually discovered that I liked art history, and then I took it seriously and I did really well in it. So, I understand that point of when you don't like something, you don't really focus. I never did homework really, but I had a really good memory. And that's the thing, is school is really good for people who have good memories and who have the sort of personality structure where you maybe don't agree with authority, or you don't agree all the time, but you know enough to play the game and sort of get through in the system. And I was really good at that, And there was sometimes like in that art history class where I was just like, fuck that, I'm not doing it, I'm just going to do what I want. And then, you get the consequence for that, right? But generally speaking, I was able to play the game and, take advantage of prestigious, opportunities and things like that, like going to a prestigious engineering school and so forth. And so I understand how the academic game is played, although I never really personally liked academics. I could play the game, and when I focused myself, when I went to university my first year, I got straight A's. I was on the dean's list, all that kind of stuff. So I knew how to play that game when I disciplined myself and I focused on it. But in high school, I never wanted to do my homework. And then eventually in college, I didn't really like that structure either, right? So I could see the difference of when I applied myself versus when I didn't. And it's just a matter of self-discipline and studying and application and so forth, right? Of course, there's a lot more that goes into it because you can put all the hard work you want into it, but if you don't have the processing ability to really understand what you're doing, it's interesting. You can game the school system, but when it comes to real life, you can't really apply things because you didn't really understand. You just memorized. And that was the trap, or that was the problem I ran into later in my life outside of university, is realizing, wow, my memorization ability isn't really helpful because it doesn't allow me to take information and apply it. It just allows me to game a system based on, did you memorize something or not? And that's really the name of the game in school is can you take what the authority says, memorize it, and spit it back? That's what the system wants for people in positions like doctors, lawyers, etc., and professors and executives and all that kind of stuff, because they want the people who are basically the yes men to the system, right? And you don't really understand all the details, but you know what the company line is, and you repeat that, and you make sure everyone sticks with that. And you can see that, very clearly over the last few years in this world, and the problems that causes. Just one dimension of it. But so my point is, I know how to play the school game. I'm not one of these people who did terrible in school and is like, screw school, I hate it because I wasn't good at it. I was good at it and I still hated it. Um, and the social aspect, someone's putting a comment here on the Facebook. Um, like that's where I basically met all my friends. And I socialized in school. I socialized outside of school, but it was mostly people that I knew. And parents will often put their kids into school just for that reason, because like where else are you going to meet kids? So there's a dynamic to that. Of course, I'm not agreeing that that's the only way you should do it, but that is another reasoning why people put their kids in school. But again, then you have things like the bullying. That's where you learn the social dynamics of competitiveness because you're competing against your classmates. That's where you learn about social circles and cliques. The popular kids, the not popular kids. That's where you get the bullying, and that's where and that's also where parents who want to have some real say over the character development of their kids. And like let's say you don't want your kids watching TikTok all day, but if you send them to school, I mean, all their friends are going to have cell phones and iPads and all that stuff, and they're going to be on TikTok and showing them that and the video games, and there's pornography, there's all kinds of other stuff that they're being exposed to. So I can understand why a parent would, typically the point of a parent not wanting their child to be socialized by the other kids in the school system and the school system itself. Usually those parents, I think, typically are going to take the homeschool approach. The parents who are reacting primarily to the force and the non-recognition of the child's intrinsic motivation and the non-allowance of just playing and having fun, those are the parents who are more going to approach the unschooling. And of course there could be some blending and mixture, and people are, so you've got homeschooling, you've got unschooling, you've got all kinds of different approaches and ideas, and it's based on the parent's reaction to specific points in the school system. So with homeschooling, I think the major trap that people fall into is more, what curriculum do I use? And then recreating in a way a lot of the forced structure that you see in schools, and that can be a problem. But of course you get more of the one-on-one with the parent, and you get maybe less of the authoritative structure that you get in schools, and that's a different peer group and so forth. But with the unschooling, when I talked about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I would say the major problem, the baby that's being thrown out in that context is, and again, I'm just going to clarify, I'm not an unschooling expert. I'm not promoting unschooling. And so an unschooling expert can come in here and say, well, that's not what unschooling is. It's this, this, and this. But the thing is, you can talk to 5 different experts, and they're all going to have a different opinion because there's no unschooling authority. If there were, I mean, that would kind of defeat the whole point of what unschooling is, isn't it? So what I understand from people who present themselves as experts is that it's about playing, and free play being the foundation of a child's education, and then that being how the child learns, and the child choosing things based on their intrinsic motivation, and the parent not forcing things upon the child, and always coming from the child's choice and their initiative. And so part of that is in terms of application, is that unschooling communities, parents, approaches, etc., they promote the idea that you shouldn't put any sort of academic focus on your children at all, especially from a young age, but really until the child sort of decides to choose that. And this is an extremely dangerous thing because, and it's funny because in my interaction with this unschooling expert, they were saying that, they were talking about me. They were saying, your children may be winning the race, but my children aren't racing to begin with. And the thing is, think about it, okay? So again, I'm not talking to the fanatics and the hardcores. You're probably not going to hear me, but it's for those people who are like, something's not right here. You may think that your child's not in a race, but that's not how the system thinks about it. That's not how Jeff Bezos thinks about it. And at the end of the day, who's going to have more say about how you can and can't educate your child? Because you have to understand, the world is becoming more and more automated. The system is exerting more and more control over what you can or can't do personally, in terms of how you can move money in and out of bank accounts and why. Your physical movement, look at the digital passports and all that kind of stuff that's been coming, right? There's all these things going on under the surface, and if you're paying attention, you can see it. So if you don't know how to operate in the system, you can't be outside of it. It's not possible, right? And those who say, well, I'm just going to get a bunch of land and go and work the land on my own, like, you can't do that without money, and without proper education. And I mean, I know because we have property and I know what it takes. So people can't fool me on that. I know what a tractor costs, and I know what, wood costs and lumber and seeds and soil and all this kind of stuff, right? So you're going to have those who are in some sort of lucky, fortunate position where they can sort of be outside of the system from their perspective and make it seem like it works, but that doesn't work systematically for everybody. We have to have solutions that can work generally for people, because everyone else is dependent upon the system. And if you're the only one with a farm and food, guess who everyone's coming after? So you can't escape the system. It's all around you. So I would suggest that you not try to escape the system, but you rather look at how can I be as effective as possible, being equal to the system while not being of it, while still supporting my children to understand who they are as living beings, as life, which is equal in everybody, and recognizing that and making that an integral part of their identity, and making giving as you want to receive an integral part of your character. The 13 Destiny Principles, right? And they're on the website, destiny.org, destni.org. You can go look at those. Those are the principles I stand by and that I suggest. That would be part of the principles that you instill in your children and in yourself, that you live from. And then beyond that, like, what does your child need to be able to do? So they're not going to be of the system because they're going to have principles instilled within them, but they still have to function in the system. And there's lots of really cool things about the system, having the ability to drive on a road, or get food that you didn't have to grow the freaking wheat yourself, and there may be an advantage to that too, but I mean, geez, not everyone can do that. We need systems to make sure people have what they need or have access to that. And so if your child is inferior to that, meaning they can't understand at a basic level and comprehend how the systems work, they're always going to be at a disadvantage, because the people who run the systems will use that as a way of saying, well, it has to be done this way or this way, which is not best, and you will accept it because you're being inferior to it. It's the same reason people vote for politicians that are essentially lying to them in their face and they can't see through it, because the person says, well, I don't know how to run that thing. I don't know how that actually works. It's like if you go to the mechanic and they're like, well, we got to do these repairs. It's really expensive. And you're like, okay, fine. Because you just couldn't look and see. Like, I remember one time I had this Explorer, and it was like a 2013, and the electronics kept going out. The air conditioning kept going out over and over and over. And I just took it and had a computer diagnosis, and it showed me that it was one little fuse that kept going out in the little circuit board underneath the dashboard. So I just had to replace that fuse a few times. They cost like 10 cents or whatever. And after a few times, it didn't have that problem anymore. But imagine if I had gone to the mechanic and they were like, oh, yeah, you need a whole new computer system. It's $10,000. And I'm like, oh, no, what do I do? I guess I'll have to do it, because you don't have the vocabulary to just be like, let me check myself. Let me see what's going on here. Some basic level of understanding. It's just an example. But that's how it works generally in our economic system, in our political systems, all the systems that we all participate in and that run our world. So if your child is not equal to that within having the vocabulary, the reasoning ability, and the communication ability to stand equal to the politician, they're going to always be a victim to it. And so the major problem with the idea that all your children need to do is play, and they're going to learn everything they need through that. Well, how are they going to learn? Well, actually, before I pose a rhetorical question, let's look at it like this. What a child plays, in terms of how they what their think about this. You go to a playground at a school, right? And you see a bunch of kids, and they're playing at recess. But what are they playing? They're playing whatever they saw on TV. They're playing, fighting and betrayal and jealousy and doctor and all these other things, right? Children are going to play naturally. That's not something you need to worry about. But the content of how they play is dependent upon the inputs that were put in, that they were exposed to in their environment, especially in the first 7 years of your life. That's where that window is, where they're just absorbing and downloading everything from their environment. If you put a child in the first 7 years in the company of wolves and you don't support them effectively, I mean, you're not there. Like, you have these examples. Look up feral children, Feral, feral children. If you put them out in those environments, or they're it's usually not done deliberately, obviously. The child gets lost, whatever. They're raised by wolves. After a certain period, the first 7 years or so, they can't even learn to speak ever again. They can't even learn to sit in a chair. Like, they're running around on all fours, eating meat, peeing outside, and howling at the moon. And this has happened. And it's really tragic. It's sad. But there's that window. So the philosophy of unschooling, and if this is not your philosophy, and you're like, no, I would not ever do this, then hey, that's great. Then you can hear what I'm saying. But if you're going to hold on to this philosophy, you got to challenge this point. So for those of you who might get sucked into the unschooling thing, this is the one point you got to challenge, okay? Which is, you can't force your child to do anything. If anything that's force is inherently bad, evil, terrible, blah, blah, blah. Now, I agree in the sense that if force is defined as the child understands what's going on and you're forcing them to do something anyways, which is not best, meaning the thing that you're telling them to do or forcing them to do is not best, that would not be best to do. But how are you defining force? Because what was interesting in this interaction was what I explained to this person is, because what they were saying was, well, yeah, okay, your 5-year-old, talking about me, your 5-year-old might be already reading at, maybe you consider it a high school, college level. I mean, it's hard to even give an actual estimate of it, right, without accepting the standards of the school system and so forth. But let's just call it high school, college level. Your child may be reading at that level. They may be riding ATVs and rowing and doing their own kayak, building electronics and all this stuff. And you may say it's because they've built their vocabulary from a young age, and he's doing algebra and all these things, and he's only 5 years old. And they had a problem with all of that because they said there was no way that they chose to use Technotutor when they were little. They have to choose it. And so what is suggested is that my child shouldn't know algebra yet. They shouldn't have the vocabulary they have, the communication ability, because they should have chosen to develop it. And since they couldn't have, then it was forced. And this is where I pointed out the dishonesty within the way this person was thinking, because think about this, okay? And I'll give more context. Think about even the most purest unschooling parent, okay? You don't force anything on your child, right? But in the environment that your child is in, like let's say you're in America, you speak English, they learn English from you. Because if you took that child out of your household when they were a tiny baby and you put them into China with a Chinese family, they'd learn Chinese. They wouldn't speak English. So your environment shaped the language that they learned. So you may emotionally detach yourself from that and say, well, I didn't force them to learn English. And they naturally learned it from their environment. But this is the point. You forced it because you didn't give every option to them. You forced the point. You maybe didn't do it emotionally through what you would consider force, but you have limited their exposure in a way where their natural learning ability in those first 7 years only had access to the sounds of the English language. And there's many things in the environment also they're learning beyond the language, but you have limited it. And so, and I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. I'm not saying, oh, you're bad, you forced them. But I want the unschooling person to look at this and say, oh, wow, okay, what is my reaction to this word force? Because if you're suggesting that if I am able to explain to my child, well, actually, let me back up. This is the part they have a problem with, the unschoolers. Because what they would say is, there's no way your child chose to use Technotutor from a young age. Well, there is. It's not either they're totally free to choose anything they want, because as a parent, if your child says, well, I'm going to choose to take this knife and cut myself and see what happens. I'm playing. You wouldn't allow that. And if you did, you're insane. And you might say, well, I changed the environment so they don't have access to knives. Okay. But that's like you're just manipulating the environment so they have limited choices, but then you're not teaching them how to make choices. And this is the issue, is can you as a parent influence your child in terms of how they make choices? Because with our kids, when they were very little, we showed them what scissors were, knives, and so forth, and we explained to them all the details of it as much as we could, and we built their vocabulary using Technotutor for them to understand blade, sharp, edge, cut, blood, like all these different things, and explained and communicated with them and let them hold the knife for a moment and like, let's cut together. So then as they developed that awareness of it and integrated that word knife into who they are, into their vocabulary, their body, everything as who they are, they would be able to see a knife there and not just go grab it and start randomly cutting. They would be making the choice. And it would be unconscious to a large degree because most of the choices you make are unconscious. This is a big point to understand for the unschoolers. To say that the child must choose it, not even 0.5% maybe of any of the choices you make as an individual are conscious. They're subconscious and primarily unconscious based on the environment and how you were impulsed, and therefore the vocabulary that was put into you from in the first 7 years of your life, or even sooner, meaning less than 7 years. So as a parent, you are developing your child's vocabulary, but doing it primarily, and I'm not saying it's totally by accident, because parents may be aware of that and they may be very specific about how they speak to their children, what they expose them to. But what's interesting is with the unschoolers is that they like to say, well, it's like you're avoiding self-responsibility by hiding behind the idea that my child should have an intrinsic motivation for something before they can be supported to study it. Like as a parent, I can't support my child to study something until they express an intrinsic motivation for it. But what you don't understand is that your intrinsic motivation is unconscious based on what you've been impulsed with in the very beginning stages of your life, those first 0 to 7 years. That's where your intrinsic motivations come from, and it comes from the examples you see around you. So what Technotutor is all about is supporting that intrinsic motivation to have more choice, to have more things it can be motivated towards. If you don't have the vocabulary to do something and you don't understand it, it's very, I was going to say it's difficult, but it's impossible to have motivation towards it, because intrinsic motivation comes from a knowledge, a knowingness within yourself that if you approach something, you might fail, but you can learn it, and it's like you want to know it. You want to understand it better. You want to deal with it. But it has to be an object in your frame of reference before you can even do that, which means it has to be a part of your vocabulary. And so this is why it's always emphasized that lower income families, they need to have books in the home. And I'm not saying this is the solution, but it's always talked about as part of the solution by the system, is like, you need to have books in your home, because if your children aren't exposed to books regularly at a young age, they're not going to develop any interest in reading whatsoever. So that is important. Of course, what we're suggesting is you add Technotutor to that and you actively develop their vocabulary, and they're going to, like my 3-year-old wants to read all the time, Seneca. She's always reading now. And that happened it was like suddenly a switch. Once enough vocabulary and recognition of symbols was accumulated inside of her, it was like suddenly every book all the time I want to read and I want to talk about it. I want you to read to me and I want to read it myself. And hold on, what is that word? And she picks up a book and she's like, Cameron, why does it say, do you want to go here? Why does it say that? And I'm like, well, let's read the story together and let's talk about why it says that, because there's context. And so at any time, random time of the day, you can go into my house and you'll see Seneca reading and Max over here reading. And then sometimes they'll be playing and jumping on the trampoline or riding their ATVs around, or they'll be, cooking with Katie, or I'll be doing something with them or whatever, But in the unschooling philosophy, they would say they would actually have a problem with that. And I know because, and again, I'm not saying every unschooler would have this, but if you go down the rabbit hole of accepting any point where the child didn't, quote, freely choose it themselves is force, well, then this is the logical conclusion that you come to, is like, well, these children have been forced to be so good at reading And they wouldn't have chosen reading on their own if they hadn't been forced to use their techno tutor. When in the reality is there was no force used. Of course, the person doesn't know that because they hadn't investigated. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But it's funny because they said, I can't understand how they could have possibly chosen to do it. And it's like, well, if you're a 10-month-old and you're sitting in your parents' lap and they're looking at your phone, are they choosing that? Or did you put it in their environment? And I'm not saying we did that. I'm saying that's what we did with TechnoTutor. Put them in front on our lap, and here's our TechnoTutor. Hey, look, can you see that? What letter is that? And we would go through that until they could recognize all the letters. So by 18 months, both of our two oldest children, right, because we also have a 1-month-old, but both of our two oldest children, 3 and 5 now, by 18 months, they could each recognize upper and lowercase letters. And by 20 months, they could recognize the numbers and punctuation and mathematical symbols. And that's a progression where that's why Max now can do algebra. And like we were sitting, I was in the bathroom with them, just being with them while they were taking a bath last night. And Max randomly goes, Cameron, 4 is not a prime number. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, it's got 3 factors, 1, 2, and 4. It can't be prime. And 1's also not technically prime because it only has 1 factor, right? And it's like, I go, okay, what about 8? Because I'm like, maybe you just memorized this, right? I mean, I don't think that, but I'm just saying maybe you think you did, right? I go, what about 8? And he goes, 8 can't be prime. And I said, why not? He goes, it has 4 factors. And I said, what are they? He said, 1, 8, 2, 4. I'm like, cool. So it's not prime. And I said, well, and I said to him, I go, let me ask you a question. I go, can any even number, other than 2, can any even number that's not 2 be prime? And he was like, kind of thought about it for just a moment, and then he kind of starts like laughing because it's like you could see him having the realization, and he was like, no, it can't. And I said, why not? And he goes, and he's like trying to articulate why, even though he could see why. And I go, let me ask you a question. Any even number, we're not talking about 2, just any even number other than 2. I said, what does it have to have as a factor? And he goes, and he laughs, he goes, 2. And I said, so how many factors does it have to have at least? He was like, at least 3. And I'm like, so can it be prime? And he was like, no, exactly. And he was so excited about that, right? So it's like now he's like taking this concept that he clearly understood. And why was he even talking about prime numbers? Because number one, he knows what prime means because we've done the vocabulary in TechnoTutor. He knows what all the numbers are. And I've given him videos to watch because I'm always, when I'm at the office like I am now, I'm always downloading videos of like, what's the next thing they can learn about and so forth, right? And it's like, instead of watching TV, Netflix, etc., or playing video games all day long, I give them videos. And they're not watching them all day long. I'm just saying instead of watching TV, I bring videos to the house, I put them on the computer, I show them which new ones I've got, I tell them what they're about, and I say, if you guys want to watch them, you can. And invariably, during the day, Max will go and he'll be like, I want to watch some of my videos. And he just has like a whole big folder that's being accumulated of all the videos I've given to him that I've checked myself to make sure there's no advertisements or weird stuff or, weird, it's like you have to check and make sure, like if they're talking about computers, are they going to start showing computers being used by Nazi Germany and like bombs going off? Like, do I want my children impulsed with that imagery? No. So I'm going to make sure the video is like appropriate to what images want to be impulsed. So the imagery is very specific, right? So I'm careful about it, responsible towards it. But the point is they're watching videos, and we have videos about ballet and tap dance and jumping on the trampoline, different tumbling moves, cartwheel, like all kinds of stuff, not just stuff about math. Videos about electronics, look up my video on my YouTube channel about Max's binary book, where he wrote a whole book himself about binary and logic gates. I mean, it's incredible. Like the level of understanding he has is the stuff that you would be studying in a first-year logic course in university. Okay, and he understands all the basics of it better than the person who's already been taking that course for a month. And you might say, and imagine somebody looking at all of that and going, that's bad. What do you mean it's bad? It's like amazing. It's bad because there's no way he chose all that himself. He was forced on that. And it's like, well, he wasn't forced. If you had been there in our environment every day, you would see there was no force. And they're saying, well, the fact is, it's a curriculum. TechnoTutor is a curriculum, and if it's a curriculum, it's bad. It's like, are you looking at the principles of unschooling and what is actually best about it? Are you investigating and keeping what is best, or are you just like, well, but Rudolf Steiner said, there can't be any curriculum, or Maria Montessori or John Taylor Gatto, whoever said there can't be a curriculum. So if it's a curriculum, it's bad. And it's like, well, do you not realize you already indoctrinated your child into a curriculum without realizing it? The moment you opened your mouth around them, the moment you started speaking, you are indoctrinating them into a curriculum called the English language. You're just doing it in a way that's not best, because they're not getting the direct integration of the symbols properly. They're only getting it from you. And you know what's also being carried by all your words is all your beliefs, fears, limitations, anxieties towards each word is all resonating. So it's like they're copying the curriculum from somebody who has been limited. Because where did you learn that curriculum? From your parents. It's like copy, 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 with all the errors being copied and amplified. Versus learning it in a pure, direct way, which is what TechnoTutor is about, where you integrate the symbols, and then what you see is over time your child develops a highly effective processing ability and understand it, what it really means, beyond just the emotional value maybe the person or the author is putting on it. And what was the other point? Processing ability, reading ability, or did I say that? Reasoning ability, meaning they can now make choices reasonably rather than, here's the thing. The parent is saying it has to be the child's choice, but they're not even questioning whether the child is choosing what is best. Why is choice the important point? What should be important is the child is able to choose what is best. And if they're choosing what is best, that's what you should be supporting. If you're just supporting choice, it's like placing emotional value on the word choice instead of using common sense to realize, how do I support my child to make the best choices? That's what should be important. Not how do I just make sure anything they do is always their choice. That's good, but that's not the point. The point is not I should be free to choose. The point should be I should have the ability to always choose what is best, and then be free to choose that always, because I'm not encumbered by irrational points within myself that would make me choose something that's not best. And if I want to choose something that's not best, someone should be there who's responsible to be like, hey, that's not the best choice you should make. You should make this choice, and here's why. Oh, you don't understand. Okay, what is that you're not understanding that's preventing you from seeing that that's not the best thing? Because I can clearly see it. But it's like there's this idea within it that, well, I don't know what's best for this person or this it's like, who knows what's best? The parent or the child? The parent has to know what's best. The child doesn't. Because a child is born into a world that operates based on language, which is an artificial construct. And we use our language to understand the information around us, and therefore make choices based on the things that are here artificially, that are not a part of us already naturally. Combine that with the point that your intrinsic motivation comes from what you're impulsed with, in terms of data, information, vocabulary in the beginning, and you realize that there's very few choices you make that are actually your own choice, that wasn't actually the direct input of the environment and people who went before you. So it's like, how can I pretend like I'm not forcing my child to do stuff when I really am? That's what unschooling's about. How can I have a clean conscience and feel like I didn't force my child because I'm reacting to the point of having to be forced to live in a world where I have to compete for survival? And I don't want to give that to my kids. And the thing is, you can't prevent that, meaning your child's in a world where they have to compete. So how do we change competition to be one where we're competing with ourselves to be the best we can be, and to support other people to be the best they can be? That should be the only and then any competition would be like friendly competition. Like, hey, okay, look, man, I'm going to build a car. And if you want, you can build a car. You want to build a car too? Okay, cool. Let's try to build the best one. And I'm going to get a team together. You get a team, and let's compete. And we'll race each other or whatever. We'll figure out these standards. And then if you do better than me, I'm going to learn from you what you did. And then we're going to compete again. And we're going to try to, and we're going to push each other to really create the best one. And whoever creates the best one, let's promote that to everybody as the best one and show them why. Like that would be the kind of competition. Not, hey, if you don't get this particular, if I don't manipulate enough people to feel good feelings towards my product, I can't survive. I mean, that's what competition is. And if I can't lower my prices cheap enough and have enough slaves to justify my low prices, and get enough people to buy my product, well, I'm screwed because somebody else is doing it cheaper. Meanwhile, the only person that benefits is that one person at the top or the shareholders or whoever. I mean, we have a fucked up system because people are not educating their children to be able to compete in a effective way as equals. People are so limited within their ability to communicate and learn and process data and information. So as an unschooling parent, my one point to really, really just get across to you is don't fall into the trap of my child will eventually learn everything naturally on their own. Because unfortunately, by the time that the consequence is too severe to really make a to easily make a difference, the time to make the easy difference is when the child's very young, because they don't already have all of their emotions, personality, everything developed, where it's really hard to get through. Helping a teenager is a lot harder. Supporting a teenager to focus themselves is very difficult compared to helping a 2-year-old. And you might say, well, 2-year-olds, the terrible twos, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's just lack of communication, lack of processing ability, lack of vocabulary. And as a parent, you can support those terrible twos by developing the vocabulary in your child to understand you and communicate with them, and then also having the patience to realize it's coming from the fact that they still don't fully have the vocabulary to express themselves, right? So patience is really important, obviously. Patience is the ability to tolerate incompetence. Just getting a call here. I'm just texting my wife. She's texting me or calling me. So if you're an unschooling parent and you're starting to see the problems, the cracks, which is like, hey, I took my kid out of school and all they want to do is play video games all day. This is not good. Like, this is going to lead to disaster, but I don't want to put it back in school because of XYZ reasons and so forth. Like, what if all you had to do was spend 30 minutes a day on a specific point that is not hard to do, that takes a little bit of discipline from the parent initially and focus and patience, and then that discipline starts to become an intrinsic motivation within the child once they start to see the result of, oh my gosh, I can do a lot more than I could before because of this simple 30-minute. Once they see that, wouldn't that be worth it? If that was the only thing you did that was curriculum, was that you made sure they understood every word and the proper definitions, and it was like automatic, unconscious, which if you read, let's see, where am I? All the reading research, there we go. And over here I have beginning to read somewhere on my shelf. Even in the system, it's like, if you can just get these points, you will be able to read and process information. It's like, that's the thing TechnoTutor does. And you're not going to get it in school. You're not going to get it in unschooling. Like, parents, honestly, for those of you who are like, you're going to say no to this question, just stop watching. Don't watch my videos. Fuck off. I don't care. But for those of you who are like, have some common sense left, right? If you could support your child to be a genius and be able to make lots of money, have great relationships, have good character, and really be able to understand the world around them, and it just took 30 minutes a day, wouldn't you want to do that? Versus, well, I'm just going to let them just discover it all on their own and just like, and what I'm saying is, think about 30 minutes a day. And then the rest of the time, what do? Play. That's what our kids do. They just play all day. And for them, building their vocabulary is also playing. Like when I go to work, I'm playing. I'm not being forced to do it. I'm choosing to do it. There's some things I have to do within it where I don't really want to do them, but I'm doing it because I understand why. So I choose to do it. You want to call that force? I mean, if a baby doesn't want to eat, what do? They don't know any better, right? Long term, big picture, we can change the environment through changing the systems that run our world so that what you call force is like a total non-issue. But trying to change that right now for you and your child by going, well, I'm just not going to force him to do anything. I'm not going to force him to learn anything. I'm not going to even teach him. Like, you may not think it's a race, but when Jeff Bezos and whoever his friends are have all their money and they go to the politicians and go, we need more slaves at Amazon or whatever company. We need people to be in the school system. So we need you to outlaw unschooling. And, we need people to have an app on their phone that every day checks whether their child is in school or not. And we're going to come to their home and force them to get all kinds of things. And if you don't do it, you can't use banks. You can't use crypto. You can't use money. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. We'll turn off all your vehicles, turn off your electricity, all that stuff. I mean, what choice will you have then? Do you want it to get to that point where you have to wake up and realize, oh shit, I'm reacting to the point of being forced to do things. And because I have that fear, I'm allowing a world to be manifested that's based on force more and more and more and more. And I'm trying to create this little paradise scenario for just me and my children instead of realizing the responsibility I have to support them to stand up in this world and change the system for everybody. So we're not here for people who want to avoid self responsibility. We're here to support those who are like, I want to take my children's education, not unschooling, not schooling, beyond schooling, to education. We're not here to school, homeschool, unschool, deschool, reschool, free school, flat school, whatever. We're here to educate. It's got nothing to do with school. The basis of education is every word that you know, can process, can spell, comprehend, that you can recognize unconsciously. That's what education is. It's just the words that you know. Because from that flows everything that you're able to do, everything that you're able to perceive, how you relate to things. It is the basis of how you communicate. It's the basis of your relationships. It's the basis of everything. It's the basis of our world. Right now, we have a world where people are living out the freaking apocalypse. It's like, just read Revelation, the Revelation according to John or whatever it's called in the end of the Bible. It's like, that's what's going on now. And is it because I'm saying the Bible has some magical predictive ability? No, it's because everyone's been programmed with it. So everyone is manifesting it. That's all that's happening. We manifest the words that are programmed into us. And TechnoTutor is the only tool that can fundamentally change those things. So if you're struggling, if you're having problems in any area of your life, I would suggest that you look into this and see, where is the words that I'm not living correctly? And if there was an easy, supportive way, easy, maybe it's not easy, because problem is when I say easy, it's like, oh, it's just going to happen for you. It's not going to happen for you. It takes discipline. It takes effort. It takes walking through fears. It's definitely not easy. I don't want to say it's hard, because you won't even consider it. But what choice do you have? Do you really have a choice? As a parent, is it your choice whether you educate your child properly or not? We all want to be able to play, but don't react to the fact that you are in a world that you've accepted and allowed that fundamentally makes it so no one is really allowed to play and have fun and have joy in their life, and then say, well, I'm going to try to create that outside of the system for my child. If they have an effective vocabulary, everything they do will be fun, even work. And even the times where they feel like, or it's not feel, even the times where they have to do things they would rather not do, they can experience joy within it, because they would be doing things that are best based on understanding. So everything becomes a choice based on understanding reality and processing it effectively. So if you want to make unschooling work, the one thing I would suggest is to take 30 minutes of the day, put TechnoTutor into that, and let that be the one curriculum. The words that make up our language, that's the operating system of how we perceive, process, and interact with reality. Put that as a part of your day for your children. With my kids, they do it first thing in the morning after they wake up, obviously. They might play a little bit, but before we watch any videos, before we play any kind of games or whatever, and it's either before or after breakfast, it just depends. But before we go and we go out to our day and start having fun for the rest of the day, we got to make sure we do our TechnoTutor. And now they do it on their own. my 3 and 5 year old. What's the big deal? You say, well, that sounds like force to me. I ain't going to do it. What can I say? Like, you're setting your child up for failure. So for those parents who are out there who are like, man, I don't want to let my child experience the consequence of me being a retard. I want to support them with the best education possible. That would be a reason why you'd reach out. Reach out to me, go to the website, techno-tutor.com. Look, there's nothing on the website that's going to tell you what it is. That's on purpose, because we want to have a conversation. Because we want to know if you're somebody that we want to work with. Because if you're not teachable, there's no point. All right, we'll see you on the next one. Bye.